So, hey everyone, welcome. This is a MonteVIDEO Tech Meetup. Today we're going to have two speakers. The first is going to be Nicolas Gonzalez, talking about the work they did on CMCD and during the summer camp and as a collaborative project. And then we're going to have Nicolas from Qualabs, and then we're going to have Adrian from Bitmovin. But I'm going to let him introduce his own presentation. Nico, go ahead.
Right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. As JP said, I'm Nicolas. I'm the delivery manager lead here at Qualabs. And my talk today, I wanted to sort of tell you a story about an open source project that we did, that we started earlier this year. And this particular project achieved really interesting results for the community while helping us build some internal knowledge on CMCD. So first, I need to do like a brief introduction on how this was set up. Like this story starts with the summer camp. It was an event that we hosted on February, that it's summer here in MonteVIDEO. And our plan was to invite any video developers who wanted to spend their our summer here in Uruguay and collaborate with our video developers. We wanted to focus on connection. Basically, our motto was connecting through the power of collaboration. And we wanted other video devs to join us, experience our culture, our summer, our offices, and maybe like create something together. So we decided to ask the community in one of our meetups what interesting projects would be around for us to work on while we were having this activity. And yeah, we wanted to know what interesting ideas were out there for us to build. And we had two interesting proposals. One was from Will Law from Akamai that he asked us to build a conformance and checking tool for and service for CMCD, and Marco with a proposal of having an open source hybrid meetup platform. But basically, we did not have any clarity on how we were going to do that. Basically, we had the idea of doing something, but we were not clear on deadlines, timelines, scope, a lot of that normally goes in a project. So we started thinking, should we copy any standard open source project guidelines? Should we reinvent the wheel there? What was going to be different about our open source project than any other open source project out there? So we went ahead and tried to get some definitions. What was going to be different about any other open source project? So what we wanted to do was like open source our whole management of the project, like the whole flow, like we basically would do on any of our development teams. So we wanted to open source our entire delivery framework, basically, so that anyone on the community could join and be part of this project. So these projects would need to be like publicly available to anyone who joined, and also if they wanted like develop together with us in the process. So this meant like having a public repo, basically. That's sort of the basic for any open source project. But we also wanted to have like a public Kanban board where everyone could see what we were working on and also be part of the ticket discussions and planning discussions. We wanted to have like open ceremonies. And when I mean open ceremonies, I'm talking about like daily Scrum meetings or whatever, like have that also open. We use Discord a lot internally. So we also created a Discord server that allowed us to have like that call interaction where people would be there like while developing. That's what I call the lobby. When people were developing, we just join a voice chat and be part of that. So anyone could join and ask the developers that were working on this project what's going on and ask for help and such. And obviously all our technical discussions and like design discussions were also open. And we were going to have like a hybrid thing. If we could have in-person meetings, because we have some developers here, we were gonna try to prefer those in-person meetings or hybrid with people that were online. So in this case, you can tell that by the name of the presentation. I'm going to focus on the CMCD part of the proposal. But for that, I'm going to need to do a quick recap of what CMCD is. I'm not sure if you all know what it is, but I'm going to do a quick recap just for that. So here in this chart, we can see like a typical video workflow, right? You have your origin, you have your CDN that distributes that, and you have your video player that requests the chunks for the video. And you have like your CDN logs and your system logs and like your player logs. And if everything's going on the happy path, you're fine. So no worries there. But what happens when we do have issues? Like when we have rebuffering issues and rebuffering problems, right? We need to go and check on our CDN logs to see what's happening there. And we also need to check on our player logs and try to understand what's going on. And actually matching those two is not an easy task at all. Trying to understand on how to reproduce issues, it's even harder. And if you are behind like a huge chunk of traffic, it's even harder. So enter CMCD, Common Media Client Data, as a solution. So basically, CMCD is a spec that allows players to send specific information about their current state and their network perception in the HTTP requests to the CDN. That way, when we get our CDN logs, we have all the information stored in one place, and we know what's happening between the CDN and the player. So yeah, that's all great, but why do we need a validator? Why does the problem arise, or why was it proposed by Will? So the CMCD spec tells us what information we need to send and in what format. And it also lays out the rules so that all the players report them in the same way. But exactly that was our challenge, or at least that's where the challenge was. How can we have a tool that makes sure that when we send the request in our player, we are sending the right stuff? Like, are we sending the right format for each of the values that CMCD expects, or are we just sending garbage? And how are we gonna be testing that? Because clearly, when you request a video, you have like a really lot of HTTP requests for each chunk. So that's where our validator comes in. So let's recap a little bit where we're at. So we know what CMCD is, and now I'm going to talk about how we move from that idea of having something that validates this standard to an actual tool. So our plan was to have like a month to work on this, and we wanted to present the results at our next meetup after the summer camp ended. So at that time, we had some people that were in between projects and were undergoing some trainings. So we decided it would be a great opportunity to enhance our internal CMCD knowledge and also provide some value to the community as part of that. So how did that work? Basically, we started by setting up a team that will work on this project for a month. We had a design and requirements meeting with our head of R&D, Nicolas, and we tried to define a methodology, like an agile and as short as we could. And this meant, like in practical ways, this meant like we were going to have like 1 week sprints, and it would have like one small demo followed by a planning session, like probably on Monday and Fridays, so we could adapt quickly and make sure that we have the focus on the right stuff that we wanted to achieve in this tool for that month of work. And we also had like daily stand-ups to make sure that the team was updated, and also that anyone else who was interested in the status of the project or wanted to take part in any plannings, retrospectives, and all that, also be part of that. So tools in hand, we got to work. And I'm going to show you here the idea that we had initially after these are the results of our design and requirements session. And this was like our start point for the requirements and prioritization. And basically we had this design, this idea, like more setup in requirements. And we realized that there was a lot of stuff. If you take a look here, like having a full CMCD analyzer with an extractor, it seems like a little bit too much for a month of work. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to do something usable. So, and also that could be like our foundation for the whole diagram. So we decided to start by this part, like the CMCD analyzer API backend, and web browser interaction that we could input a URL for a video. And release that as a Node.js library that could take that data and make sure that check that the CMCD data was up to standard. So now I'm gonna jump a little bit onto our results. So after the summer camp ended, we were able to, in a month of work, make our first release of that CMCD validator library after a month of work. So we were able to achieve our initial goal, right? We released our first version of the library after a month. But basically, we did not want it to end there. Like, there was a lot of involvement on the community for this project. There was a lot of interest. We kept hearing people asking about it. So it was also a great opportunity for us to help other video developers work a little bit easier when they were implementing this CMCD standard on the players. So we actually make a decision, and we decided to keep working on it. And we wanted to keep working on building on our initial architecture design that I just showed you, and in order to provide like more functionality and easier of use for the library and make the library more powerful. So in doing that, we started integrating with different players in the market to test our tool and check and understand how the different players were sending that CMCD data. And we came into some interesting surprises, actually. So we ended up reporting some CMCD implementation bugs in different players. We reported something for Jaga, for Dash.js, and for Bitmovin. I see Adrian jumping there. And this was really interesting because it was something that we did not expect happening. Like, this was a tool to help other video developers, and we ended up finding some stuff that was not like up to standard. And we also ended up proposing some changes to the CMCD standard. Like, we were featured on the CMCD standard repo as part of the validator tool that could help. And we also find that there was some like inconsistencies and ambiguities between what was said in the standard and when people interpret when implementing that on their players. So we also ended up proposing some changes to the standard to make sure that everyone was going to be on the same page. But that was like on the community side. And we also wanted to use this as a training tool and something that helped our teams internally. So what was in it for them, right? For the developers. And the creation of this tool was a great way to involve them more in the community. Like, by hosting this event, all the developers that were part of this had to be aware of what the community was like, what the community liked, how to ask for their feedback, how to report their bugs on the players with the right information, and basically how to make the other developers' life easier. This also helped us understand what other uses the tool could have, or what cases we were not looking at from our first initial planning. And this I have an example here. We got asked, like, could we use this tool in a GitHub action, right, to validate our players or to put that in our players' release flow? And that was something that we initially didn't consider, but we ended up adding it to the backlog, so we could at some point work on it. And they also learned a lot about the specifics of the CMCD standard and how important that was for the ecosystem, and thus improving their skills. So yeah, right now we were invested, like, we could not stop here, right? So we kept working on it, and we ended up like having a fully functional web validator that can be used to check out how different players implement that and check. And don't get anxious, I will share the link at the end. And we also ended up working on a Video.js CMCD plugin so that Video.js supports sending that CMCD data. So was that it, right? No, like we needed to keep working on it. So, but here I am entering in a bit of a spoiler section. I know JP loves to do some spoilers, but we also built a CMCD analyzer tool on top of all that I showed you, and following that initial architecture, we ended up creating a tool that could be used to test the CMCD implementation, like in other platforms, like mobile. And it also allows you to capture all those logs and that information in Kibana and generates graphs that you could use to analyze. And what is most interesting about that is that you could try and compare how the different players react at different scenarios and how they send that information. And you could like easily graph that in Kibana. And we are also building an SBTA university course for CMCD based on this tool because it provides like a really easy way to dive into the topic and test it out. Yeah, we ended up working on that too. And here is like, I told you all about what we did and how we did it. And what I wanted to close up this talk with is how can we make this a recurrent thing, right? We were able to make a lot of impact in the community by providing this tool, by working on this tool. And we just had to ask like, hey, what could be interesting for us to build in a couple of weeks? That's all we asked. There was no rocket science behind it. And we definitely want to be able to create more tools in the next iterations of the summer camp. So I wanted to leave this talk with a question like, how can we keep creating these spaces? Like, how can we keep asking these questions? Maybe it's in this meetup, in other meetups. Are we taking advantage of these spaces to discuss which tools could make our life easier in the future, like as video developers? Like, what more can we create with a simple question of, hey, what could be interesting to build? You definitely can reach out to me or our head of R&D, Nico Levy. We are really interested to hear more about what ideas or what tools could we create, because this for us was a really impactful project. So before asking you guys for thanks, I wanted to know that I also submitted this talk to DMAX, so any feedback you could give me or give us is greatly appreciated. So I'm going to send in the chat a form with just a few questions, but I would really appreciate all your feedback. That's it. Thank you guys for listening in, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Nico. Congratulations. So anyone in the public, Ian, Ben, Adrian, Joao, any questions and comments? Or
Nico, I love it. I actually hadn't heard internally that you'd validated our CMCD implementation and found it wanting. So I'll connect with you offline about how we've managed to feed that back into our corporate brain to try and work on that awesome stuff that you've done there. But that's really cool work. I love it.
awesome.
Yeah. And I also think, Adrian, that requirement of how we can put this tool into our release pipeline, I think that also came from you guys. So it was a really interesting back and forth between. I know that Gabriel was really involved in this, and he was jumping in the different calls and helping the guys discuss their designs and what they were taking some of those decisions. So yeah, it's really great to be part of that.
Yeah, super cool that Gabriel was involved. That's really nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and props to you guys for making it public, kind of open source. That's great.
Every time you write a validator, you find something that's not valid. But I like that. I like that you found some weaknesses and ambiguities in the spec as well. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it also raised us a lot of questions like, are we sure that that's the right way? Like we saw one player sending one thing and our player sending a different thing, and we started asking like, what makes sense? And it was more of a theoretical question of, yeah, do we need to does the player actually need to send that information at that point in the playback flow or not? And it was a really interesting back and forth between that. So it definitely helped like make sure that the spec was more solid.
At the risk of this turning into a rabbit hole, how well did CMCD do preemptive caching for you? How well were you able to affect the CDN cache with knowledge that was coming over the CMCD data flow?
I'm not really sure if we are able to impact what, like we didn't do any testing against how the CDN reacts to the information we send. That's a really actually interesting question that you are asking. I think that in the crew there are a couple of guys who worked on this project, so maybe we should ask them. But I think that we did not do any tests like, does the CDN behavior change when we send different stuff? I think that we just stayed on the side of making sure that what the player sent, it's okay, and making sure that we are okay on that flow. But we did not try any CDN stuff.
The other half of the equation, right? That's why we're sending all this information to the CDN, is so that the CDN sets up its caching more accurately.
Yeah,
so
we do have the like the video.js plugin, so we can definitely tweak that in there and see what we get. But in any case, it's something that you could use with the analyzer and see the different versions of your player, how they interact with the CDN and what you get in response. So I see a flow there that you could use, but yeah, we didn't try that. I'm pretty sure this will be interesting for Nico when he sees the recording. So
Totally. And just a quick note here. I think, I'm not sure if Nico made it public already. He's going to post about it either today or tomorrow or something.
yeah,
we've realized that there's a lot in these of the power of the community building stuff, because it was not only Qualabs, we built others from the community helping out. So it's not our credit, it's about the community here. And that's what we try to achieve with these projects. And so we've realized that what's been successful is finding like an ambassador, someone that says, I have this challenge in the industry, that it's across the industry. It's not for my product. It's not a WOSA thing. It's not a Bitmovin thing. It's an industry thing. We need to have this done. And we're going to work on up to 3 projects that we can push, of course, internally, and we're going to put resources to it. But of course, we want the community to collaborate there, because we've seen that that's the way in which we're going to, in some way, avoid all the undifferentiated heavy lifting. Like, that makes no sense for one to be building it if we can all build it together. So if you have any ideas, Ben, Ian, Adrian, Shao, whoever, that you think, oh, this is a challenge, we could build this or that and open source it, feel free to reach out and say, hey, this is a problem we have, and maybe we can build something. Shao, were you trying to speak?
Yes. Hello. What kind of players have you used for your CMCD implementation to validate?
We use the Bitmovin player. Bitmovin player, the Shaka player, the Dash player, and I think there was also HLS.js. I need to check I can send you a link where you could try them out. But those were the main ones. Yeah.
And the plugin that you have created there, it was a video plugin for a player. What was that player?
For the video.js player.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
So
thank you very much, Nico. Oh,
So answering the question you posed there, JP, we'll be launching something quite exciting at IBC that might actually have open source modularly plugin-y capabilities. So that's a great question you asked, and let's hold that question until late September, and then I think that you might have something that we can work on together there.
love it. I know Nico's been talking to Igor about potential stuff and these ideas, but so it's great to have these channel open. And so yeah, feel free to reach out, even if you hear from someone else, like, hey, I heard someone from the industry mention this is a problem. So I think there's a lot we can do together. And of course, if you or anyone in your team wants to participate or collaborate, also feel free to reach out and say, hey, we don't have an issue, but we can collaborate. Awesome. So thanks, and keep in mind, well, I'm going to say that at the end of the event. Adrian, please go for it with your presentation. Thank you, Nico, and hope you make it to DMAX.
All right.
Table stakes.
Table stakes. Do you see my screen? I always have to start here with Zoom because it's always a bit
We
weird.
do.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Adrian. I'm actually over in Australia, but me and JP go back a little bit. So I've offered to come and I did this presentation in a few other video meetups. It started as a bit of an internal presentation, to be honest with you. It's just basically my team, well, my extended team. We looked at a bunch of Bitmovin implementations that have happened over the last while. You know, obviously we do a few hundred of these little OTT builds here, there, and everywhere. For those that don't know, Bitmovin is essentially a cloud-based video encoder, transcoder, a player suite of products, and a data analytics suite of products. We have quite a lot of high-profile customers around the world, and yeah, we kind of see a lot of the challenges that happen customer side. So what we've tried to do here is look at all the builds and all the implementations and all the requirements that have happened across the globe, and try and pull it together in terms of what are the things that customers are looking for, and what's now in 2023 just become table stakes. And the expression table stakes maybe doesn't translate terribly well, but it's things that if in 2022 you would call it an enhanced feature, you know, something that was special, something that was extraordinarily differentiating. In 2023, it's just basic foundation. So if you're going to launch an SVOD platform or any kind of AVOD, TVOD, OTT platform, these are things that you just have to have as functionality. Obviously constrained purely to the technology that we provide, which is the player and the video encoding. So let's just move on. So as we talk to these customers, there's this juggling act of different priorities as the project evolves. I kind of represent it as one of these car games. You know, it's one of those things where the cars go round and round and round and around the track. They never stop. They just keep going. Red car goes in front of the green car, goes in front of the blue car, goes in front of the white car. But at different times in the project, different things are being considered and optimized. So what this presentation does is it tries to look through the lenses of quality, as in visual quality, making sure the video looks as good as it possibly can. The measure of scale, specifically, I'm just going to throw 100,000 assets at it in a weekend. I need to be able to encode all that lot, or I'm going to throw 10 billion impressions at it. I just need to ensure that the experience is uniform across the viewing base. The concept of speed, which I kind of look at it in multiple lenses, but it's how quickly can I develop my application, says the customer. You know, how quickly can I learn how this technology works? How quickly can I innovate, as in add additional features to make my OTT product slightly better than the one that's competing to me in the same marketplace? How am I going to get that $29.99 per month in my pocket rather than the other guy that's doing essentially nearly the same service as me next to me. And kind of so it continues. And interestingly, I think it's only 2023 and maybe 2022 where impact on the planet, so the ecological side of this thing we call video, is being considered by the customer as well. And I think personally that's going to be a very evolving conversation. Certainly where I live in Asia Pacific, it's quite important, but interestingly, probably less so in some of the other regions. And I'll ask it as an open question at the end, how much the impact of planetary type concerns impact the Uruguay, South America kind of countries. But moving on, and importantly, all this is balanced against the dollar. How much is this all going to cost me in both time, resources, and energy? So I'm basically, a few slides. I'm going to be looking at each of them through these different lenses. Make sense? Yeah. All right. To set the scene on quality, and someone might have seen me use old Giselle Boyegard before in my reference cases. He's, for those that don't know, one of the key pioneers behind the HEVC protocol, codec, and he developed a measuring technique where visual quality measured on the vertical. He used PSNR, but these days we call it VMAF. And on the right-hand side, he graphed it in terms of bit rate. So when you do a video rendition, what you're trying to do is get as much quality as you can for the lowest amount of bit rate. And that graph I'm going to use a couple of times. So I'm just going to kind of slowly try and make sure everyone understands that if you're on the right-hand side and low, you're really unhappy. You're delivering really low video quality, but you're using lots of bit rate. So what that means is you're paying lots of money to the CDN people. You're losing addressable market because people with weaker internet connections aren't able to see that high quality video. And generally it's unhappy from a storage perspective, from a complexity perspective. So down and on the right of this graph is unhappy, but being able to deliver high quality at low bit rates saves you cash because your CDNs aren't as busy, saves you time because more of your users are able to download more of your content quicker. So that time to first frame is quicker. And your addressable market is quicker because those on weaker internet connections can access your 4K content, and your 4K content is where you're going to call premium, and premium is where you make your most money. The long story short is, for those half the room here probably are completely comfortable with BD graphs, but ultimately as you plot out where the renditions are, you want that graph to be as much to the top left as you can. So each of the quality that you see happens at the lowest bit rate. Why this is important is that Bitmovin will consistently be very, very good in this aspect. Our compression will consistently give you, for a given visual quality, a much better compression amount for all of the kind of benefits I've said there. So long story short is that when we're talking about the concept of quality, we have several things that we can turn on inside the code. I'm also going to try and give us code samples because that kind of makes life easier when you're implementing the Bitmovin technology, but it also kind of makes more sense maybe to this kind of audience. So essentially what we're trying to say here is that if you want better quality, turn on these sub features. And specifically those sub features are by turning on the encoding mode up to 3 pass. So you're basically encoding it 1, twice, 3 times. That's just basically a line item inside the code. Choose your codec wisely. So when you're encoding your video, don't just stop at H.264, that's very boring. Take the object that you've created to create 264 video and bump it up. So maybe represent that as VP9 if you've got a lot of Android users. Maybe bring it across into HEVC for general kind of consumption. In actually increasing number of use cases, so bump it across to AV1 because AV1's compression is just astronomical. 4K in about 1.3 megabits, conditions applying. But there's a device trade-off that has to be done there. So set the codec up, and setting the codec up, as I say, is just a matter of changing the object as where it represents itself in the small script that you use to start the encoder. Number 3 on that list is that content aware thing. So for those that don't know, one of the party tricks that we do in Bitmovin encoding is not all renditions are the same for all pieces of content. So the encoder will initially analyze the complexity of the content. So for example, something that is fast moving action, maybe water-based sports, that kind of line, they need much more bitrate to support the same visual quality, the same VMAF of 93-ish. So by analyzing the content, you're able to make your ladder the right level. So fast moving action, sports up this end, anime, flat content, Big Buck Bunny, simple stuff at the other end. So by basically adding the line per title into the config, you're turning on the analysis phase. What this is basically saying is that your entire library is going to be compressed to the level that the asset needs. So again, you're kind of saving all this big amount of stuff. And finally, there's a method called smart chunking, which is essentially looking at the breaking up of the video when it comes time to do an encoding pass. And it takes not just the segment that is being encoded at that moment in time, but it looks 2 or 3 segments ahead, and it preemptively brings that information forward. So what essentially we're saying here is that you get like a 10 VMAF point increase. So the overall quality of your asset is bumped up just by turning on that feature. And again, that's just a matter of putting the right line in the code. So yeah, this is basically the lens of making sure that quality is right for the asset. And this is typically done up in the development phase when you're making the decision which codec you're going to kind of roll through. This is also in the kind of building phase. So different customers use our technology in different ways, initiate our technology in different ways. We've got the very basic customers down one end of the scale that like to use the wizards. So encode this, encode that, click this box, drop this menu down. That's fine. That's good for small amounts of content. But as it gets more and more complex, as they move up into the full SDK, so watch folders are the next kind of line up. The simple template calls we see a lot, kind of just for people that are in the middle of the complexity range. But the full SDK is where you're essentially configuring every aspect of the encoding is all the way up at the top end. That balancing act is kind of varied, but we're seeing probably at this moment in time more people using the full SDKs just because it lights up all the functionality as opposed to making some assumptions. Scale, and this only really applies if you're a big syndicated broadcaster producer. Any point in time, Bitmovin's using 200 to 300,000 virtual machines across the globe for encoding functionality. So these are typically spot instances. So the instances from the cloud providers that are super cheap, but they're also kind of a bit unpredictable in how they behave. So the mechanism that the technology uses is it brings the video file in, it breaks up that video file into multiple sub machines. So each of the machines then has just a small section of video to analyze, encode, and then recombine at the far end. And then it kills that machine. So what we're talking about here is just making sure that your infrastructure mix is correctly set up. And this is only really applicable if you've got hundreds of thousands of assets that you want to encode in a weekend. And also you want some resilience inside your cloud infrastructure. So specifically what we're talking about here is making sure that the node location is set up correctly in the configuration. And so in this case, I'm picking the cloud provider Google, and I'm providing it the knowledge that I want to run it in the Southeast region that just happens to be where I kind of live. We're giving it the knowledge of where the input bucket lives, and we're giving it the knowledge of whether it's going to be inside my tenant, inside the cloud system that I manage, or inside the Bitmovin cloud system, and you can kind of alternate all three of those parameters as you like. So what ends up happening is, as part of the design phase, you get this mesh occurring. And again, this is only really applicable for the large broadcasters, but you're building this mesh out to be resilient to outage. So in the event of a single cloud provider failing or having challenges, you're able to do a split, split of location or a split of cloud provider. You're doing this for proximity to content. So if, for example, you're running with Hollywood studios, India Bollywood studios, you're trying to ingest stuff live over in Europe for whatever reason, you can split up your inputs to be in close proximity to your world, and you can kind of cross-populate those with your cloud providers, and making sure your outputs are set up. And outputs typically are driving your multi-CDN approaches. So being able to push out through Akamai, local telco CDN, this and that are going on at that particular moment in time. But this focus on scale typically happens at the beginning part of that running race, where you're trying to design the location of things. I mean, you can change it during your project, but this multi-CDN versus single CDN approach is something that we're kind of playing with a lot. So resistant to outage, proximity to content. Some cloud regions are cheaper than other cloud regions, so maybe it makes sense to run it in a cheap cloud region. If you're a big customer, you might not want to be single cloud. So you might want to hold a parallel relationship with Azure, Google, and AWS. So this allows for that kind of market tension between the multiple cloud providers and the multiple CDN providers. And there are tricks as well. So for example, if you use Akamai as a CDN, certain cloud providers will give you free data interchange from the cloud encoding location to the CDN, and that saves you considerable cash. So pick your cloud vendor and your CDN provider together to reduce the cost of moving the data in between the two. And some use cases are judicial. Some use cases are, I can only process inside the country of Vietnam, or I can only process inside this particular location and that location. So judicial kind of kicks in there as the final consideration. And then basically, once you've done all that, you can execute. So this is a graph that I copied off one of the customers. So what are they doing there? They're doing over a 21-hour period, 2 and a bit million minutes of content. Yeah, so that's 70,000 assets. Okay. And yeah, that was achieved about a 15%, 15 times real-time factor. So it was rolling quite a lot of content through, and that was done in a 21-hour period. And the reason you typically do that is to re-encode libraries. So if someone's got like a substandard encoding, or they're moving from one technology to another, you just throw resources at it. So basically, you just let all the cloud take the load, and just run your entire library through in a weekend, and you're kind of good to go. Yep, it's kind of runs in the speed category now. So this is like another one of those cars racing around the track, how to make sure that what you're doing is as quick as possible, and there's balancing acts to this. So we have a setting that we call pre-warming. So it's basically, if you're a type of customer that only periodically encodes something, we would talk about the pre-warming thing, which essentially just leaves resources on idle behind the scenes, which means that if you've got an asset that you need to be encoded really quick, that asset will encode really quick because the resources are idling. So like news organizations, sports organizations, like that kind of thing. An increasing number of our customers at the moment are doing the whole Dolby game. So they'll bring their master asset across in Dolby Vision. They'll use the cross-convert functionality inside the encoder to take it from the Dolby Vision dynamic range, HDR10, HLG, cross-convert, standard dynamic range cross-convert, but they're basically working with just a single mezzanine asset and bringing that across. And obviously with that mezzanine asset, you're able now to be an SVOD provider with Dolby Vision, which is kind of cool. And finally, your kind of player side of the world, which I won't talk too much about inside this presentation, but there's a whole load of stuff that you can do inside the player that undoubtedly you guys know really well. So things like gapless playback. So if you're running multiple assets after each other, turn on gapless playback so that it's caching the next asset in the queue while the first asset is still playing. So you can kind of do that TikTok, that rapid scroll maneuver thing with your thumb that everybody likes doing. You can optimize the player in all kinds of different ways, basically. And if you're doing low latency, that's a whole different conversation, but equally fun. So this is talking about the combination of packaging method, codec, DRM, and sub-DRM components. There are almost an infinite combinations of those lines. As that arrow moves across the bottom there, that's kind of valid combinations. So, if you're doing AV1, for example, you would probably do that with HLS as your package. You'd probably run a CMAF off the top of that. Your DRM's probably going to be Widevine. It's probably going to be Widevine CBC. But what drives that is the deployment order. So you have to kind of work out which is your device that you want to do in which order. And as a project evolves, we see that priority list changing. So, maybe they start the project by wanting to do deployment to smart TVs and, I don't know, Xboxes. But as the project evolves, it turns into actually what we really want to do now is focus on, X1, the Xfinity range of set-top boxes, and the capabilities switch around. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that there's the agility to switch things around, but only if you know which order you're doing it in. So the deployment order is kind of what builds out here. But if you don't understand what your value proposition is, in other words, come to me, SVOD provider, because I'm 4K, come to me because I'm HDR, then the whole project kind of grinds to a halt. So yeah, we see people changing their mind quite a lot through the project, but it's there to kind of catch those priorities as they come through. Yeah, now this is the final kind of car in that track event. So we're talking about the planet here. So we have a long-running project called Gaia, which looks at the impact of both encoding and playback on resources. So on energy consumption inside the data center, energy consumption to an extent on the device that's being used. This is a big topic, but it's a topic that is becoming very, very interesting for the newer customers, as I say, in certain regions. If you want to learn more about it, there's that Gaia research website that we've got running there underneath our kind of think tank program. I'll ask it as a question later how much kind of this impacts your region. But for me, I think this is probably the final car running around the track, which is when the project suddenly decides that environmental impact has to be taken into account. And there's a whole set of kind of settings and approaches that might be able to help in that space. I'll stop there. I've kind of jumped all over the place. As I said, this kind of started as a bit of an internal presentation. And it kind of evolved out from that point. But yeah, that's kind of me. Thank you for your time.
Amazing.
Well, cobbled together. Do we have any questions?
I do have some.
Really
So
interesting.
at the end, you go for it, Nico, if you want to mention or ask any.
No, I was just going to ask about the planet car, but go ahead. I'll ask later.
Yeah, actually, I know about the greening of streaming and the less accord, but I'm not sure if you're part of it or not as Bitmovin, and how you're seeing your customers being worried or not worried about the energy footprint of their encoding ladders and their video workflows and all that.
Yeah. It really does depend. I was over in New Zealand last week before, whenever it was, and for them, their ESG, their environmental goals as a streaming provider, I mean, large television company, was something that they like to talk about a lot. So they like to talk to their public around how environmentally considerate they are as a big television company. And this is not the whole answer, obviously, but it's just another dot point that they can present as part of their marketing or consideration or board level or wherever they want to use that messaging. But I don't think it's as important as being able to compress the video. I don't think it's important as being able to bring like Dolby Vision to the customer base. I don't think it's important as being able to support the smart television experience for your viewers. But I think it's changing, and I think it's evolving, and I think it's increasingly becoming something that comes as part of the consideration of where people buy, and certainly as part of the consideration of how people implement video streaming. I mean, it's just video streaming. It's just, you know, moving pictures. But then as you take a step back, you go, but it's moving pictures that are using hundreds of thousands of computers in aggregate. Is it better for me to run that inside my data center, you know, where I have my data center, as in the data center inside my building, inside my office, where I have this, and this going on? Or is it better to take it to a cloud provider that has some level of scale and a better coverage of this? So, you know, even the aspect of whether I take my video processing from my own location and up into the cloud is being driven to some extent by this as well. I mean, long answer is I think it's going to be increasingly important for customers, but only because it improves their own internal agenda and external agenda. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Yeah, I mean, my question was gonna be like, do you think that like data centers are gonna be like pushed to try and have like better solutions to their consumption? Like you were mentioning there, like a set of different types of machines that you use for your processing. Do you think that they're gonna be pushed, or like, are you willing to push and say, hey, I need like a better service here that doesn't take that much processing, or that doesn't take that much energy to process all this video? So
Yeah,
I think that
great question. Yeah.
It's a part
So-
of like, yeah, like companies are getting pushed by their customers, and their customers are going to push you, and then how is that like pushing end up in the data center or the big providers like cloud providers?
Yeah, I think it's already happened. So I think if you go to Google, Amazon, Azure, and say, of all of your hundreds of data centers you've got located around the world, of all your regions, which is the one which has the most sustainable power? And you might find that there's some random hydro-powered one up in Europe, or, you know, somewhere in South America that takes it from geothermal, and you'd go, okay, that therefore is a data center that is ecologically better. So that would then take a step back and say, hey, Bitmovin, when you're setting up your infrastructure locations, let's use Norwegian data center 6 to do the encoding because it's better on the environment. And then when you do the player implementation, let's turn on eco mode because the backlights will come down slightly on the device. It will be less battery hungry. So I think it's kind of like a three-way dance, but I'm actually pretty sure that the data centers are already trying to, certainly in their power consumption world, pick differentiation by being able to be powered by more sustainable power. I'm no expert in this, by the way. I just think it's fascinating that we've come in just a few short years from talking about it's a tech problem to talking about it's now a consideration on the environment.
Certainly, and I see a lot of challenges of those you mentioned there, even more in both libraries. As of new hybrid encoding standards keep coming out, and you have to reprocess everything. So I see there are a lot of balances there on CDN costs, processing costs, storage and caching, like and distribution costs, and like the quality and devices, and like it's interesting, and thanks for putting it in a say easy way of processing it and understanding it. It's really challenging. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Charles, Ben?
Did we lose the room in the middle of it? I noticed the whole room dropped out.
The whole room?
Oh, maybe it was just my zoom in that.
No,
yeah,
they're
I
there.
can see them there.
Great call.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Well, if that's it, let's call it a day. But before, I want to note that, and thanks, Adrian, for noting before. So we're going to be doing a mix of these meetups and also the Matter Talks as we had last time, so that we have this new conversational approach. And probably, so in August, we're going to have a Matter Talk. And we were thinking today with Mika and changing the plans and maybe trying to push towards talking or discussing on what IBC might bring or what we're going to be looking for in IBC. So not sure, Adrian, if you're going to be able to do any spoilers of what you're going to be showcasing. Probably not. Probably marketing's not going to let you.
Oh, well, lucky this isn't being recorded.
It is being recorded.
No, it's
but
not.
I can stop if you want.
No. Keep. That's fine. I'm joking. So I think you're seeing spoilers come out already. So I think you'll hear that there's an evolution on our player technology, which we're calling it Player X. I think it started as a code name, and now it just means 10. So version 10 will come out, and it's an architecture change. Or it's a potential architecture change if people wish to use it. There's actually a really nice blog post that's been written around how the development architecture has kind of evolved. It's a whole part of a different conversation. If you guys are interested, Igor does a really good job at presenting how that architecture is changing. But it's all to do with ensuring that JavaScript promises and waits are handled in a much more easier, much more predictable way, as opposed to constantly be waiting for promises to come back and they never. It's basically that whole management hierarchy of all of the threads that happen to get an accelerated playback is now being done in a much more interesting way. So that's kind of one thing we'll be talking about. There's a couple of things happening in coding as well, which I probably won't talk about too much. Partnerships and community is obviously a massive thing that we always talk about. So community.bitmovin.com, which isn't just us talking. In fact, it's not even us talking. It's everybody in the video industry-ish having a chat, and we've got our partners in there. So yeah, community.bitmovin.com. There's a lot going on there. And yeah, there'll be some press releases to do with certain key technology partners that we have doing exciting things or kind of semi-exciting things depending on your point of view. But yeah, I'll be there, I think. Don't know yet, but I think I'll be there. JP, you coming?
Yeah, I'm coming. Ali's coming. I'm probably a couple more from Qualabs are coming. This is going to be our biggest IBC so far. Sweet. And I've also seen Christopher posting on AI and some fascinating new frame generation kind of technology and all that. So I'm gonna keep my eyes open. Probably he's gonna. I don't want to make you spoil anything, but it seems he's pretty interested in these new shiny things.
Very cool.
Awesome. Thanks everyone, and see you in August. to what respect. I'm leaving tomorrow for a few days off, and then I'm gonna be in San Francisco. So if you I'm gonna be in New York first and then in San Francisco. So if you have any friends around that I should chat to, talk to, let me know. And see you all guys in August. Bye-bye.